This is Greer Hendricks, and I'm here with New York Times bestselling writer Jennifer Weiner to talk about her first ever story collection, The Guy Not Taken. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Greer.
This is your first story collection,
hmm
and some of these stories I know were published before, and some were written years ago and revised. Have you always written stories?
I always have written stories. Stories are what you start out with, sort of as a young writer, when the idea of writing an entire novel is just crazy daunting. And they're what you do in school because it's a lot easier to workshop a story and
Sure.
discuss it because you have a beginning, middle, and end as opposed to trying to like work through somebody's entire novel. So I've been writing short stories since like high school and then in college and then all through the 90s when I was a young reporter and then a not so young reporter. I was always had some fiction going on
Yeah.
in the going on the
Yes.
side and was lucky enough to publish some
Yeah.
pieces in places like 17 and Redbook and had some amazing
Mm.
teachers too when I was in college. I got to study with Joyce Carol Oates, who's one of the life masters of the short story. So, yeah, I always liked them and I really enjoy reading them too. So, this was fun to try.
Right. I know you've said some of your favorite writers.
Yeah, some of my favorite writers do their best work in short stories. I think Joyce Carol Oates has written some incredible ones, and Stephen King, who I
Uh,
love, who I heard read last night, has
yeah.
done some amazing short stories. And then these days, writers like Kelly Link, who does speculative fiction, where it's all sort of twisted fairy tales, and then Amy Bloom and Amy
Oh.
Hempel, who do sort of modern quotidian women's stories. Alice Munro does work like that, and I love it.
In the past few years, you've been writing novels, and some
hmm
of them are long.
yeah.
And
Sorry.
I'm sure there's a challenge then to going from long form to short form. You've
Yeah,
got to tell a whole
absolutely.
story.
There are the requirements of economy where you don't have that big canvas and you don't have the time to lavish on your secondary characters and setting the scene and doing the flashbacks. I mean, you have to know what you're going to
Hmm.
say and just get in there and do it. It's like a boxing match versus a war.
Nice.
How's that?
A sprint versus a
A sprint
marathon.
versus a marathon, a date versus a marriage, a kiss
Right.
versus oh, never mind.
Okay.
Yes, a kiss versus falling asleep. There you go.
Well, let's talk about some of the stories. So, the family in Just Desserts bears
hmm
close resemblance to your own
Well,
family.
it's a
Yes.
distilled version of my family. I'm the oldest of four, and Josie Crystal, who is the heroine and narrator of the first three stories, is the oldest of three. So it's
Yes,
different.
yes, yes.
It's different. Damn it.
Uh,
But yeah, my joke when I went to college is that I took creative writing classes for 4 years, and there was a single theme to my work.
yes.
And it was, my parents got divorced and it hurt. My parents got divorced and it still hurts. Did I mention that my parents got divorced? We're talking hundreds and hundreds of pages about that family or versions of that family, about divorce from everybody's perspective. The children, the parents, the father, the mother. Of those 100 pages, hundreds and hundreds of pages, I think that there were maybe 50 pages worth saving, and hopefully you'll be reading them in The Guy Not Taken.
Hopefully,
But
everyone will agree with us. Yeah.
yes, that I saved the right ones.
Yeah.
But anything that starts off just like my life, by the time we get through all of the revisions, winds up its own thing because fiction just gives you more freedom and more possibilities. I mean, my parents' divorce was like a lot of parents' divorce and different in its ways and the same in its ways. But when you're writing fiction, you can take elements of other people's divorces or divorces you would just imagine or sort of give people plausible reasons for behaving the way they do that your own parents did not helpfully provide you, and you can just do more with fiction.
This sort of transitions into the Tolstoy quote of happy families are
Mhm.
all alike. Every
Mhm.
unhappy family is unhappy in its own way.
Right.
Do you agree with
I
that?
I agree with the notion that happy families are all different, but the thing of it is, from a fictional standpoint, happy people just aren't fun. I
It's
mean,
true.
they
It's
just sort
true.
of sit there
Yeah.
on the page. They don't want anything. There's nothing driving them. And unhappy people, on the other hand, have a lot driving them because usually they're trying to get happy.
Right.
They want to figure out sort of what happened in their lives and what mistakes they've made and where they made the wrong turn and are there possibilities. And that's the question that interests me as a
Hmm.
writer. Are there possibilities? Whereas if I'm going to write about a happy family or like a happy woman, for example, somebody who was like perfectly content with her marriage and her children
Yeah.
and her choices and her balance and how she looked and her friends, that's not going to be much of a story.
And how many women out there are really like
Yeah,
that?
and nobody's going to identify
Right.
because, well, not that everybody's that unhappy.
No,
I
no,
mean,
no,
there's
but
good medication for that these days, but people, I think, in life and in their entertainment are interested in possibilities. That's what I think.
well, that really ties into the title story, The Guy Not
Mm-hmm.
Taken, in
Mm-hmm.
which a woman, well,
Mm-hmm.
you tell.
Well, The Guy Not Taken is a woman with a new baby and a small apartment and a husband who works a lot. We're already setting her up for trouble. And she finds her ex-boyfriend's online wedding registry and realizes that he's getting married and that he's making a life without her, a life to which she will have no access, that he's moved on and she's moved on, and she starts thinking about her choices and maybe he was the guy she was supposed to be with, and what if she wound up with him? There's sort of this magical twist to the story where she gets a chance to sort of revisit her choices a little. I remember in one of the reviews of the movie In Her Shoes, a critic sort of said, well, Jennifer Weiner is a masochist as a writer because she does these terrible things to her
Uh-huh.
characters and must enjoy seeing them suffer, I guess was the implication. And it's not so much that I want people to suffer, although there are some people, I will confess, I would not mind. But it's the idea of if you're in a moment of crisis or in a moment of doubt or in a place where you are questioning the things that define you, that interests me as a storyteller.
And you've also said that oftentimes you'll take a character and think about what's the worst possible situation that could
Mm-hmm.
happen to that
Mm-hmm.
person in that particular
Right.
moment and
But I
explore
usually
that.
wind up ending the books, bringing her somewhere better.
The Hollywood ending.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because in Buyer's Market, you actually play with the idea of a Hollywood ending. You
Right.
say, if life were like a movie, Jess would have looked into Stephen Ostrovsky's eyes and fallen deeply and immediately in love.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that readers expect these Hollywood type endings in your writing? And how do you work with these
Right. I
expectations?
mean, that's a good question because there's a couple things at play. There's what my readers want, there's what I like as a reader
Yeah.
and a writer, and then there's the question of does that mean that everything I write has to end a certain way forever and ever? Amen. I think that when you're writing about the kind of people I'm writing about, who hopefully are these women who feel sort of funny and smart and relatable, like someone you know, like you or your friend or your sister, you want good things to happen to them. I mean, you don't necessarily want it to be, and then the farm burned, and then the crops died, and then the creek rose, and then the plague came, and then she got raped a couple times. Like that. There are writers who can do that.
Yeah.
I'm not one of them.
Right.
I don't know if it's maternal or sisterly
Mm.
toward my characters, but I want to give them good things. I mean, if a writer is God to her creations, which is an idea that Stephen King has a lot of fun with, I would like to be sort of a benevolent deity
Mm-hmm.
and give them the things that they want. I don't think that the things that they think they want and the things that I think they want are always the same. So I think that there would have been a certain satisfaction to Jess in Buyer's Market, who has
Yes.
made the mistake of getting rid of this fabulous apartment and then has to go back and find the key to the linen closet, would look at the guy who bought it and realize that they were soulmates. And like she says, that it would be a great story for the vows column in the Sunday Times, and there they'd be. But Jess had more of her journey to make, and she had to sort of be a single woman and learn the lessons that single women learn. Not that I think that everybody in the world needs to be paired off, and not that I think that that's the only possibility of happiness that exists for women, but I do think that there's kind of an elemental human drive to find someone to share your life
Mm-hmm.
with. And if it's a boyfriend or a husband, or if it's a family or a close circle of friends, I think that that's something sort of basic to all of us. And I think that in all of my books, I have all of my characters to end with that network of support, whether it's a husband or a sister or a best friend or a mother who sort of hasn't been there and then
Yeah.
comes back again. And that's what I want. And I don't know if that means that I give them all Hollywood endings or not. I think with Little Earthquakes in particular, I struggled a lot with one of the characters' marriage and where that
Mm-hmm.
was going. And I couldn't bear to pull the
Yeah.
plug on it. Even though maybe realistically this wasn't a marriage that was going to work, I just could not do it to her.
And Goodnight Nobody, there you had a
Hmm.
very ambiguous ending.
Yeah, although I think it was ambiguous romantically, but I
Right.
did sort of give
You gave her a
Kate,
support
I
group.
gave her her mother
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
I thought that was nice of me.
I thought so too. And
Thank
she always
you.
had Jamie, Janie.
Janie. Yeah.
She always had Janies,
She'll
so
never lose Janie.
no.
No,
So
it's
she had the
true.
support network.
It's interesting to sort of view this in the context of the great chicklet debate and sort of, all these books with their pink covers and their shoes and boys and romance and happy endings. And it has made me think a lot about sort of, well, what do I believe constitutes happiness? I mean, does being married with a kid myself mean that's
Hmm.
what I think every woman should do? Well, no, I mean, not really. It's not for everyone. I'm after connection and
Hmm.
some kind of connection, and that's what I want my characters to have.
Well, let's go back to an original romance that you wrote
Mm-hmm.
about.
Mm-hmm.
Candy Shapiro and Bruce Guberman in Good and Bad.
Uh-huh.
In this collection, there's a story called Good Men
Good
from
men.
Bruce Guberman's point of view.
Uh-huh.
What was that like writing from his perspective?
Well, believe it or not, Good Men was written before Good in Bed was. And I always knew I wanted to write about those two characters, where Canny was sort of kind of like me, and Bruce was sort of kind of like a couple of different guys that I dated. And, you know, the question of who do you choose to spend your life with, and who are you going to be in that life, interested me a lot in my 20s, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that everyone's trying to answer that
Yep.
question. It's sort of, who am I going to be and who am I going to be with? And am I going to die alone? And, am I going to find the right job? And am I going to find the right city and find the right neighborhood and find the right place? And that story came first, which surprises a lot of people. Like, I actually had sort of Bruce in my head before Canny, but it's sort of the question, and it's one of two stories in this collection that take place basically on the eve of a wedding
Mm-hmm.
and deal with the issues of, if you're part of the generation where the parents had the 50% divorce rate, if your parents are divorced, or if you know a lot of people whose parents who were, how do you choose to get married? I mean,
Right.
shouldn't everyone our age just be like, oh, forget it? Like, it didn't work out. It's a historical artifact. It's a vestige of oppression of women, and I'll just have a baby on my own, and maybe I'll have a guy and maybe I won't. But yet, as you know from statistics and
Yeah.
from our own lives, I mean, women keep doing it, men keep doing it. There's been almost sort of this renewed commitment to the notion of making marriages work. And so I wanted to talk about those things, talk about sort of divorce and parents and having all of that in your history and choosing to sort of jump across the abyss anyhow.
And the story is very funny.
Yes, well, of course, stoners are funny to write about. They just are. They have this ongoing debate. It's the night of a bachelor party, and they're trying to convince various people throughout the course of the evening that Walt Disney was a pot smoker, because who else would name a
I
dwarf
love this.
Dopey? And, and they
It's
keep
so
saying there's
funny.
one called Sleepy too.
I know.
He had to be. And then they get onto Old King Cole. He called for his pipe and he called for his bowl.
You had fun writing this.
I do. I do. I have a natural affinity for stoners. Just, because you just laugh at them,
They're,
and they,
they're
they sit there and eat their Cheetos and laugh right back.
A not so funny story, maybe my favorite in the collection, is The Mother's Hour.
Oh, yeah.
It's such an accurate portrayal of parenting in those first few years,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a very unlikely friendship that ensues between two women.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and tell us about
Yeah,
your.
I was just answering the Reader's Guide question about the Mother's Hour and where that came from. And the Reader's Guide said, well, did you join a lot of groups as a
Yeah.
mother? And of course, like I talked about, like if I didn't get out of the house with my baby every day, I would feel isolated and lonely and bewildered and
Yeah.
trapped, usually before 10 o'clock in the morning. So I had
Yeah.
to like get out and go somewhere. The deal with the moms that I knew, and my daughter's now 3, and I basically feel like I know every woman in Philadelphia who had a baby the same year that I did, because I've like met them all at like, playgrounds and playgroups and
Yep.
birthday parties and little gym and music
Mm.
class and art class and
Mm.
tumbling class and all the classes
T-ball?
and T-ball, of course. Uh-huh. The way we parent now, I think, is a very effort intensive kind
Mm.
of thing where everyone wants to give their kid the best. And whether that means attention or classes or clothing or gear or whatever, I started thinking, what would happen in one of these mothers groups if somebody totally disruptive showed up? If somebody who didn't look like them and didn't act like them and didn't come from the same kind of background that they did, and just sort of like didn't believe what they believed, or didn't look like she believed what they believed. And so I sort of imagined this mother's group of different women than the ones I know, sort of the very perfectly put together, older and wealthier and well groomed. And then what if this like 19-year-old mom shows up with like blue hair and a back tattoo?
Mm-hmm.
And how would they react? And what if it turns out that she's kind of the best mom
Yeah.
of all of them?
Mm-hmm.
And what would they do? And what they do in this story is a little bit like what Shirley Jackson's people in the lottery do. They sense the threat that this woman represents and get rid of her, kind of. And it's told from the perspective of this mother who is having a terrible time with her own child. And I would,
Daughter.
yeah, and I would like to apologize in advance to my daughter Lucy, who's going to read this someday and be like, "Mom," because
It's so not Lu. It's
it's
not
not
Lu.
Lucy. I mean, Lucy is very sweet, but can be very willful,
Yeah.
as all 2 and 3-year-olds can be. And this child, she is the Gandhi of willfulness. Like, just as Gandhi was sort of Gandhi of peace, like, she can, like, and the parents just don't know what to do with her.
Yeah.
The line that I like in the book is that she keeps sort of parroting this lingo, like, she's a spirited
Spirited.
child,
Right.
right?
That's what they
And
are.
right, which is what, of course, she's culled from one of the parenting books that it talks about. She reads late at night like they're porn, because she's like trying to find something that's going to make her feel better about this. And then, she has all these secret doubts about her own worth as a mother and her own marriage. And there's a lot going on in that one.
It's very, very.
Dark,
It's dark.
dark.
It's dark.
Yeah, it's
It's
dark.
powerful. It's not a Hollywood ending.
Mm-mm. No, no. An expensive piece of jewelry is involved.
That's right. Switching topics. More often than not, your stories take place in Philadelphia or on the East Coast. And in this collection, Swim is set very vividly in Los
Mm-hmm.
Angeles. What's up with that departure?
Well, my whole family lives there now. I live in Philadelphia, but I have 2 brothers and a sister-in-law and a niece in LA. So I spend time there. Swim takes place in a coffee shop on West Beverly. I was in LA for a while and I was trying to do some work. And so I did what I do in Philadelphia, which is take my laptop to a coffee shop. When you take your laptop to a coffee shop in Philadelphia, like, nobody bugs you. People just assume that you're like a grad student or
Right.
whatever, and you're just there. And I'm sitting in this coffee bean and tea leaf, and every time I look up, there are more and more writers with laptops at the tables. Like, first there's 2 or 3, and then there's like 8 or 9, and then there's 20 of them. And they're all like either writing by themselves or writing with partners. They're all talking about like plot arcs and through lines, or they've got the cell phone in the middle of the table and they're talking to somebody who's obviously an agent about like
Uh-huh.
deal points and percentages. And I'm just like, okay, this is like a Twilight Zone episode where like every
Yeah.
table is me, but they're all blonde with big hooters. Like every single one of them. It's like me, but better looking.
Uh-huh.
And then I had to leave. I've put in some time in
Yeah.
LA, and that's where Swim comes from, or that part of it is sort of. And
Hmm.
also, I wrote it out there. I was out there for a long weekend, and that's when I wrote the first draft of it. I'm really pleased with it. I hope people like it. I know short stories are a different kind of animal than a novel, and for a lot of people, it's like novels are nothing, like they want that immersion and that richness and the sort of the fullness that a novel brings.
I think for you, what's different is people are really used to reading you in the short form in your
Yes,
blog
on my
because
blog.
they turn out to it. So I feel like they're familiar with that in your voice.
I hope people will like this and will respond to the material. I am working on another novel, so stay tuned.